I've maintained from the beginning a $1 trillion tax increase is a complete non-starter. It'd be devastating to the economy, doesn't solve the problem, it's the wrong way to go. But we were at this impasse, and we were at that impasse for a period of months. And I was wrestling with this question of, is there a way that we could put some kind of revenue on the table, since the Democrats are so insistent on this, that might be able to allow us to break this logjam? Is there a way we could do it that would be consistent with our principles, consistent with the very important priority of having pro-growth economic policy? And there were two facts that I thought we ought to take advantage of in a way. One is the fact that we are currently facing the biggest tax increase in American history. We're about 13 months away from massive tax increases across the board, and as much as I hope we'll be able to prevent that, it's not obvious to me that we will have the political ability to prevent those from occurring. So that is reality number one. We're facing a grave threat to our economy and to taxpayers. Secondly, we continue to be hobbled by what we all know is an absurdly ridiculous tax code, one that's terribly unfair, incredibly complicated, difficult to comply with, misallocates resources. So it struck me that maybe it would be worth something if we could avoid the biggest tax increase in American history and at the same time do it in a way that would generate pro-growth tax reform. And that's how I developed this framework that we proposed to our Democratic colleagues. It had a tax component, it had a spending component. On the tax side, the idea was, how can we maximize economic growth? And since I believe very strongly that capital formation is one of the biggest drivers of economic growth, we said, let's make sure we preserve the things that allow for capital formation. So let's insist, as one of the features of this proposal, that the capital gains dividend rates and the estate tax rates that are currently in force become permanent. Secondly, let's insist that we have a revenue-neutral corporate tax reform that would lower the top rate to 25%, broaden the base on which taxes are implied, and develop a territorial system so that we could encourage, among other things, a huge repatriation of hundreds of billions of dollars that are overseas. There has been significant bipartisan acknowledgement that we need to do this kind of corporate tax reform. Rob Portman, to his credit, was a very, very passionate advocate for this. Many of us on the committee spent a great deal of time working on the specifics of what this would look like. I thought that this is something that we could and we really should do within this committee. Thirdly, on the individual income tax side, what I suggested is that we lower marginal rates. Let's shoot for 20%, a 20% reduction across the board in all marginal income tax rates, and then offset the lost revenue by limiting the value of deductions. And I think we could and should be flexible about the exact mechanics by which we achieve that. I personally think that the mechanism that Marty Feldstein developed, whereby you limit the value of deductions to a percentage of adjusted gross income, is a very appealing way, but there are other ways. But in any case, our proposal was that we do it in a way that does not make the tax code less progressive than it is today, that we maintain existing progressivity, with one very important exception, and that is that we would further restrict the value of deductions for the top two brackets such that we would generate a net $250 billion over 10 years for deficit reduction. In addition to the $250 billion so generated, we propose that we have another $250 billion of revenue that would come from relatively non-controversial sources, things like user fees, asset sales, the feedback that comes from higher compliance with a simpler tax code, for instance. The total revenue piece in our proposal was $500 billion. We then complemented that with the suggestion that we have $750 billion in spending reduction. And we had long since given up on the idea that we were going to block grant Medicaid to the states, for instance, or that we were going to adopt a premium support model for Medicare. As much as I think those policies are what we need to do, at this point we were looking for what's possible in the final couple of weeks before the clock ran out on the super committee. And so we suggested that these spending reductions be comprised of items that had already been vetted by both sides and that had at least been tentatively, to some degree, deemed acceptable to both sides, at least in the context of a broader agreement. The combination is $1.25 trillion. When you add in the savings of the results from lower interest payments on less borrowings, you end up with just under $1.5 trillion. So what we offered, I think, was a very, very reasonable offer. We offered to generate revenue, as the Democrats insisted they wanted. We suggested that we do it through the very mechanism that every bipartisan group that has looked at this suggested, which is tax reform that broadens the base and lowers the rates. We suggested that we do it in a fashion that would make the tax code even more progressive, which is something that the other side insisted that they have. We offered a combination in which the spending reduction to revenue ratio was more favorable to the Democrats than any of the bipartisan commissions had suggested. And we offered a plan that would have allowed us to modestly exceed the goal that was created for the committee in the legislation. Nevertheless, the Democrats said no. They said they need $1 trillion tax increase. That's what they were interested in. And we weren't interested in doing that kind of damage to our economy. So in the end, why did it fail? I think there were a number of reasons, and over time additional reasons may occur to me, but at the moment, a few of the reasons. One of the fundamental reasons, I think, is that there was an asymmetry of incentives. I can tell you the Republicans had a very powerful incentive to reach an agreement. The 6 of us wanted to very, very badly. And it grows from just a sense that we all have of the urgency of this crisis. I really don't think we have a great deal of time to hope that the markets are going to continue to lend money to a government that is pursuing an unsustainable fiscal policy.